Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping into the Fallout universe to uncover the complete history of one of gaming's most iconic pieces of technology: power armor. The walking tank that turned soldiers into legends and became the symbol of humanity's greatest achievements and darkest hours. This is a story that spans centuries, from the desperate days of the resource wars to the irradiated wasteland where these metal giants still walk among the ruins. Before we begin this journey through time, take a moment to hit that like button if you're ready for tonight's deep dive into Fallout lore. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these detailed explorations into gaming universes. Drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're listening from. I love seeing our global community come together for these stories. Now get comfortable, settle into your favorite spot, dim the lights if you need to, and let's travel back to a world on the brink of collapse. Picture this. It's January 2077. The frozen battlefields of Anchorage, Alaska. Chinese forces have held this territory for over a decade. American soldiers are dying in the snow, conventional warfare failing against overwhelming numbers. Then, through the blizzard, something appears. Massive figures, towering over normal men, shrugging off bullets like rain. The T-51 Bay power armor units have arrived. But this victory came at a price nobody could have imagined. The technology that saved Anchorage would survive the nuclear fire that consumed the world. And in the wasteland, it would become something far more than a weapon. The story of power armor begins not with triumph, but with desperation. By the year 2050 the world was dying. Not from war, not yet, but from something far more insidious. The wells were running dry. Oil, the lifeblood of civilization, was vanishing. Nations that had once cooperated now eyed each other with suspicion and hunger. The Middle East dissolved into chaos as the last drops of petroleum sparked conflicts that would never truly end. Europe tore itself apart in the resource wars, desperate countries fighting over scraps while their populations starved and froze. The United States watched this global collapse with growing dread. American society had been built on abundant energy, on the promise of endless expansion and consumption. Now that foundation was cracking. Gas lines stretched for miles. Riots erupted in major cities. The government imposed strict rationing, turning neighbor against neighbor. Food became scarce as agricultural systems dependent on petroleum-based fertilizers and fuel began to fail. The American dream was suffocating under the weight of scarcity. Then in 2066, the nightmare arrived at America's doorstep. The People's Republic of China, equally desperate for resources, invaded Alaska. It was a bold and brutal move. The last frontier held oil reserves, uranium deposits, and strategic position. Chinese forces swept across the Bering Strait and dug in for a long occupation. American troops rushed north to defend the territory, but conventional military tactics were failing. The Chinese were well-equipped, well-trained, and most importantly, they were winning. The United States military establishment faced a terrifying reality. Their soldiers, brave as they were, couldn't match the sheer numbers and determination of the Chinese forces. The harsh Alaskan terrain favored defenders. Traditional combat vehicles struggled in the extreme cold and rough landscape. Infantry units were being cut down in brutal close-quarters combat. American generals watched their casualty reports climb and knew something had to change. They needed a force multiplier, something that could turn individual soldiers into unstoppable warriors. West Tech, a private defense contractor with deep ties to the military-industrial complex, had been experimenting with powered exoskeleton technology since the early 2060s. The concept was revolutionary yet simple. Encase a soldier in a suit of mechanized armor, powered by a portable fusion reactor. The servo motors would amplify the wearer's strength. The armor plating would protect against small arms fire and shrapnel. The sealed environmental system would allow operation in hostile conditions, from Arctic cold to radioactive zones. In 2065, the first prototype rolled out of West Tech's facility. The T-45 series power armor was crude by later standards, almost primitive in its design. The armor plating was thick but poorly distributed, creating weak points at the joints. The fusion core technology was new and unstable, giving limited operational time before requiring replacement. The servo systems were loud, announcing the wearer's presence long before visual contact. Soldiers training in these early models reported mechanical failures, power loss at critical moments, and a learning curve that claimed lives during exercises. But despite these flaws, the T-45 represented a quantum leap in infantry warfare. A soldier in power armor could carry weapons that would normally require a vehicle mount. They could march through machine gun fire that would shred unarmored troops. They could operate in environments that would kill a normal human within minutes. The military brass saw past the problems to the potential. If they could refine this technology, perfect it, they could change the course of the war. By 2067, the first combat-ready T-45D units were deployed to the Anchorage front line. The Chinese forces had never seen anything like them. American soldiers, transformed into walking tanks, pushed through defensive positions that had held for months. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Chinese troops found their weapons ineffective against the armored giants. Morale collapsed in sectors where power armor units operated. The tide of battle began, slowly at first, to turn. The success of the T-45 units in Alaska proved the concept, but West Tech's engineers knew they had barely scratched the surface of what power armor could become. Combat reports flooded back from the front lines, and each one told the same story. The armor worked, but it could work better. Soldiers complained about the weight distribution making extended operations exhausting. The fusion cores drained too quickly during heavy combat, sometimes leaving units stranded in hostile territory. The armor plating, while effective against most small arms, showed vulnerability to armor-piercing rounds and explosives. Most critically, the maintenance requirements were staggering. For every hour of combat operation, technicians needed 3 hours of repair and upkeep. West Tech assembled their best minds and poured unlimited funding into solving these problems. The military didn't just want improvements anymore, they wanted perfection. By 2067, development of the next generation had begun in earnest. Every component was redesigned from the ground up. Engineers studied the metallurgy of the armor plating, discovering new alloys that could disperse kinetic energy more effectively while weighing significantly less. The fusion core housing was completely reimagined, incorporating better shielding and more efficient energy transfer systems. The servo motors received precision upgrades that reduced their noise signature while increasing their responsiveness to the operator's movements. The breakthrough came in 2069 when West Tech's lead physicist solved the power regulation problem that had plagued the T-45. By implementing a cascade system of energy distribution, the new design could maintain full operational capacity for extended periods while drawing less power from the fusion core. This single innovation doubled the effective combat time of a power armor unit. Suddenly, squads could conduct deep penetration missions without the constant fear of their armor shutting down miles behind enemy lines. Testing of the prototype occurred at sites across the American Southwest, far from prying eyes and potential saboteurs. The Mojave Desert became a proving ground where soldiers pushed the new armor to its absolute limits. They operated in sandstorms that would have blinded conventional forces. They marched through temperature extremes that ranged from freezing desert nights to blazing afternoon heat that melted the paint off vehicles. They engaged in live fire exercises that would have been suicidal without the armor's protection. Each test revealed new capabilities and new possibilities. By 2074, the T-51 series entered production. When the first units rolled off the assembly line, even the hardened military observers stood in awe. This wasn't just an improvement over the T-45, this was a completely different class of warfare. The T-51B model, which would become the standard configuration, represented the pinnacle of pre-war American engineering. The armor plating used a polymer composite that could withstand direct hits from anti-tank weaponry. The helmet's targeting system integrated with the weapon systems, allowing for unprecedented accuracy even in chaotic combat situations. The strength enhancement was so significant that operators could tear through reinforced barriers or lift debris that would require heavy machinery to move. But the true genius of the T-51B lay in its operational flexibility. Previous models had been limited to specific combat roles, but this armor excelled in every environment and every mission profile. Need to storm a fortified position. The armor could absorb the defensive fire while the operator cleared bunkers with handheld heavy weapons. Need reconnaissance in contaminated zones. The environmental seals allowed operation in lethal radiation for extended periods. Need a quick reaction force that could respond anywhere. The improved mobility meant power armor units could keep pace with mechanized vehicles across rough terrain. The military deployed the T-51B across every active theater of war. In the Gobi Desert, American forces equipped with the new armor broke the stalemate that had cost thousands of lives. Chinese defensive positions that had seemed impregnable crumbled before power armor assaults. In the frozen wastes of Alaska, where the T-45 had first proven itself, the T-51B units pushed Chinese forces back kilometer by kilometer. The technological superiority was so overwhelming that some Chinese commanders simply abandoned their positions rather than face power armor units in direct combat. January 10, 2077 marked the culmination of over a decade of warfare. The liberation of Anchorage saw power armor units spearhead the final assault that drove Chinese forces from American soil. The battle became legendary not just for its strategic importance but for what it represented. The T-51B had transformed American soldiers into an unstoppable force. Newsreels showed armored figures striding through explosions, shrugging off enemy fire, reclaiming frozen ground that had been contested for years. The propaganda value was immense, but the reality behind those images was even more impressive. Training facilities like Fort Strong in Massachusetts and various bunkers across the country became the proving grounds for power armor operators. The military recognized that the armor didn't just require physical capability, but mental resilience and tactical brilliance. Not every soldier could handle the responsibility of piloting what was essentially a one-man tank. The washout rate during training was high, but those who succeeded became elite warriors. They formed the backbone of America's military might, the tip of the spear in every major operation. The military structure itself began to reorganize around power armor units. Traditional infantry supported the armored troops rather than the other way around. Entire battle strategies assumed the presence of power armor in the order of battle. The doctrine changed from massed formations to small unit tactics where a handful of armored soldiers could accomplish what previously required a full company. Power armor became more than equipment. It became the defining symbol of American military supremacy, the physical manifestation of technological dominance over a resource-starved world. Even as the T-51B proved itself on battlefields across the globe, the American military machine refused to rest on its laurels. Victory in Anchorage had demonstrated what power armor could accomplish, but the war with China was far from over. Intelligence reports suggested the Chinese were developing their own powered armor systems, crude copies based on captured American technology. The arms race that had consumed the world's resources now extended into this new frontier of mechanized warfare. Deep within classified research facilities, a new generation of power armor was already taking shape. The Enclave, a shadow government composed of the most powerful figures in American politics and military, had been quietly funneling resources into advanced weapons development. They knew something the average American citizen did not. The world was running out of time. Nuclear war wasn't a possibility anymore, it was inevitable. When that day came, they intended to survive, and they intended to rule whatever remained. The X-01 project emerged from this paranoid genius. Engineers pushed beyond the already impressive capabilities of the T-51B, incorporating experimental technologies that wouldn't see widespread deployment for years, if ever. The armor's polymer composite gave way to even more sophisticated materials, experimental alloys that existed only in laboratory settings. The fusion core received modifications that increased its output while simultaneously improving its efficiency, a combination that seemed to defy the laws of thermodynamics. The targeting systems integrated artificial intelligence subroutines that could predict enemy movements and suggest optimal firing solutions. Production numbers for the X-01 remained minuscule compared to earlier models. This wasn't equipment meant for frontline troops. These suits were reserved for special operations, for the kinds of missions that never appeared in official reports. A handful of units were stationed at highly classified installations. Area 51 held several. The White Spring bunker in West Virginia kept a small cache. Other locations remained unknown even decades after the bombs fell. The Enclave intended these suits for their own people, for the chosen few who would inherit the ashes of the old world. But Power Armor's story in the final days before the Great War wasn't purely about technological advancement. The armor that had been created to defend American values became a tool of oppression. As society collapsed under the weight of resource scarcity and social unrest, the government turned its mechanical warriors inward. Food riots erupted in major cities as rationing failed to prevent starvation. Protests against the war and the government's authoritarian measures drew massive crowds. Power armor units dispersed these gatherings with ruthless efficiency. The annexation of Canada in 2076 showed the world how far America had fallen from its founding ideals. Canadian resources, particularly timber and fresh water, became targets for a desperate nation. When the Canadian government refused to surrender their sovereignty, American troops crossed the border. Power armor units led the invasion, crushing military resistance that stood no chance against such overwhelming force. Citizens who had once been neighbors and allies now watched American soldiers in mechanical suits patrol their streets, enforce curfews, and suppress any hint of rebellion. Propaganda films tried to maintain the image of power armor as a symbol of protection and strength, but the reality on the ground told a different story. Civilians learned to fear the distinctive sound of servo motors and heavy footsteps. In cities across America and occupied Canada, that sound meant someone was about to be arrested, beaten, or worse. The armor that had made soldiers into heroes now made them into enforcers of an increasingly tyrannical regime. The same technology remained, but its purpose had twisted into something dark. Military production reached fever pitch as 2077 progressed. Factories worked around the clock, churning out T-51B units as fast as components could be assembled. The government was preparing for an invasion of mainland China, an operation that would require every power armor suit they could field. Training programs accelerated, pushing new recruits through condensed courses that older soldiers considered dangerously inadequate. The quality of operators declined as quantity became the priority. Veterans watched with growing concern as green troops received armor they hadn't properly earned or learned to respect. October 2077 arrived with the world balanced on a knife's edge. Power armor units were deployed globally, some preparing for the China invasion, others maintaining order in restive territories, still others guarding critical infrastructure and government facilities. Maintenance crews worked endless shifts keeping the aging T-45 models operational while newer T-50, 1B and T-60 variants received priority treatment. Fusion cores were stockpiled at military bases, their distinctive glow visible in storage facilities from coast to coast. Nobody knew that October 23rd would be the last day of the old world. Power armor operators went about their routines, some on patrol, others in training exercises, many sitting in barracks waiting for orders that would never come. When the air raid sirens began their mournful wail that morning, most people assumed it was another drill. The drills had become common as tensions with China reached their breaking point, but this time the missiles were real. The atomic fire that consumed the world caught power armor units in varied circumstances. Some were sealed inside military installations when the bombs hit, their bases becoming tombs or time capsules, depending on the integrity of the bunkers. Others were caught in the open, the nuclear blast washing over them like the wrath of an angry god. The armor that could withstand conventional weapons found itself tested against forces it was never designed to endure. Many suits failed, their operators dying instantly as heat and radiation overwhelmed even advanced protection systems. But some survived, scattered across a landscape transformed into hell on Earth. The world ended in 2 hours. That's how long it took for thousands of nuclear warheads to reduce centuries of human civilization to radioactive ash. Power armor operators who survived those first moments found themselves in a reality that defied comprehension. The suits that had made them invincible on conventional battlefields now served a different purpose entirely. They were coffins for some, lifeboats for others, and for a fortunate few, the only reason they drew breath in a poisoned world. Military installations across America became islands of survival in an ocean of death. Mariposa Military Base in California housed soldiers who had been conducting classified experiments with a substance called forced evolutionary virus. When the bombs fell, the base's reinforced structure protected those inside from immediate annihilation. Captain Roger Maxson commanded the garrison, a man whose strict adherence to military protocol would soon give way to something far more significant. His soldiers, many still wearing their power armor from patrol duties, survived while the world outside transformed into a nightmare landscape. In the days following October 23rd, radio communications sporadically crackled to life between isolated pockets of survivors. Military protocols dictated specific responses to nuclear attack. Chains of command that assumed some form of government remained functional, but the silence from Washington, D.C. told its own grim story. No orders came from the Pentagon. No presidential directives reached the scattered units. The United States of America, the nation these soldiers had sworn to defend, had ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Maxson faced a choice that would echo through generations. His superiors at Mariposa had been conducting experiments on military prisoners, human testing of the FEV, that violated every ethical boundary. When Maxson discovered the truth, something inside him broke. The government he served had become monstrous long before the bombs fell. On October 27th, just 4 days after the apocalypse, Maxson declared his unit in full desertion from the United States Army. It was a symbolic gesture in a world where symbols had lost their meaning, but it mattered to the men and women under his command. The decision to leave Mariposa came from cold calculation rather than sentiment. The base sat too close to the newly formed radioactive hellscape called the Glow, where a direct nuclear hit had turned the landscape into a zone of lethal radiation. Staying meant slow death from contamination. Maxson gathered his people, their families who had been on base during the attack, and every piece of valuable technology they could transport. The power armor they wore would make the journey possible. Without it, crossing the Wasteland would mean certain death. The exodus to Lost Hills took weeks. Maxson's group, eventually calling themselves the Brotherhood of Steel, traveled through terrain that bore no resemblance to the California they had known. Cities had become craters. Forests had burned to ash. The sky itself had changed, a sickly yellow haze filtering sunlight into something weak and diseased. Radiation storms rolled across the landscape without warning, forcing the travelers to seek shelter in ruins or simply endure within their armor's protection. People died along the way, succumbing to radiation sickness, injuries, or simple despair. But the power armor kept most of them alive through conditions that would have killed unprotected humans in hours. Lost Hills Bunker became the Brotherhood's sanctuary, a pre-war military installation that had survived the nuclear exchange intact. The Brotherhood established something unprecedented in those early days. They weren't trying to rebuild America or restore the old government. Instead, they created a quasi-religious organization dedicated to preserving technology and preventing humanity from destroying itself again. Power armor became central to their identity, both practical necessity and sacred symbol. Only those who proved themselves worthy through training and dedication earned the right to wear it. Meanwhile, scattered across the ruins of America, other power armor units faced their own struggles. Some military personnel had been sealed in bunkers during the attack, their bases becoming tombs of pre-war technology. The soldiers inside faced agonizing decisions as supplies dwindled, and the realization set in that no rescue would come. A few managed to break out, their armor allowing them to survive the hostile surface environment long enough to find shelter elsewhere. Others remained trapped, their suits eventually becoming their graves as fusion cores depleted and life support failed. The transformation of power armor's significance happened quickly in those chaotic years. Pre-war, these suits had been standard military issue, impressive but ultimately just another piece of equipment produced by the thousands. Within months of the apocalypse, they became artifacts of a lost age. The knowledge required to maintain them existed in only a few minds. The parts needed for repairs couldn't be manufactured anymore, only scavenged from other suits or pre-war stockpiles. Most critically, the fusion cores that powered the armor were irreplaceable. Each core represented a finite resource, its energy slowly depleting with use until it became worthless metal and ceramics. Common wastelanders who encountered power armor in those early days reacted with a mixture of awe and terror. To people struggling to survive with primitive weapons and makeshift shelters, a person in functioning power armor seemed superhuman, possibly divine. Stories spread through survivor communities about armored giants who could walk through radiation storms and shrug off attacks from the mutated creatures now prowling the wasteland. Some of these stories were true, others grew in the telling, transforming real events into legends. The Brotherhood wasn't alone in recognizing power armor's value. Other military survivors hoarded whatever suits they could find, either from their own units or scavenged from the ruins. Without the Brotherhood's organizational structure or technical expertise, many of these individuals eventually lost their armor to mechanical failure or violent confrontation. A working suit of power armor made you powerful, but it also made you a target. Raiders, desperate survivors, and rival military remnants all coveted the technology. Blood was spilled over suits that had once been mass-produced, their rarity in the New World making them worth killing for. The Brotherhood of Steel spent decades transforming from a band of military deserters into the Wasteland's technological gatekeepers. Their philosophy crystallized around a simple but powerful belief that humanity had destroyed itself through misuse of advanced technology, and preventing a second apocalypse required strict control over dangerous knowledge. Power armor became the physical manifestation of this ideology. The Brotherhood hoarded every suit they could recover, viewing each one as both a sacred relic and a weapon too dangerous for common wastelanders to possess. Their recruitment standards reflected this mindset. Joining the Brotherhood meant entering at the lowest rank, performing menial labor, and proving absolute loyalty over years of service. Only after demonstrating technical aptitude, combat prowess, and ideological purity could an initiate advance to the rank of knight or paladin. These elite ranks earned the privilege of wearing power armor, a ceremony treated with religious reverence. The armor wasn't just protection or a tool, it represented trust, responsibility, and membership in an exclusive warrior caste that saw itself as humanity's guardian. The Brotherhood scribes maintained detailed records of every power armor suit under their control. Each piece had a history, sometimes tragic, often heroic. They knew which suits had belonged to the original Mariposa garrison, which had been recovered from military bases, and which had been taken from unworthy wastelanders who lacked the wisdom to use such power responsibly. Maintenance became a sacred duty. Scribes spent countless hours studying pre-war technical manuals, preserving the knowledge needed to keep the armor functional. When a servo motor failed or armor plating cracked, Brotherhood technicians performed repairs with the care of surgeons, treating each suit as irreplaceable because in many ways it was. Regional chapters of the Brotherhood spread across the wasteland over the decades, each establishing territory and searching for lost technology. The Mojave chapter, the Capital Wasteland chapter, the Commonwealth expedition. Each group carried power armor with them, a symbol of Brotherhood authority and military superiority. Local populations quickly learned that Brotherhood paladins in their distinctive armor were not to be challenged. A single armored warrior could suppress raiders, defeat super mutants, and enforce the Brotherhood's will across vast territories. But while the Brotherhood controlled much of the power armor scattered across the Western territories, they were not alone in possessing advanced technology. Far from the mainland, on an oil rig in the Pacific Ocean, the Enclave had survived the nuclear holocaust. These were the inheritors of the pre-war American government, military officers and political elites who had evacuated to secure locations before the bombs fell. Unlike the Brotherhood, the Enclave never abandoned their claim to authority. In their minds they remained the legitimate United States government, and everyone else was either a loyal citizen or a mutant to be exterminated. The Enclave's technological capabilities dwarfed what the Brotherhood had salvaged. Their oil rig installation included manufacturing facilities, research laboratories, and stores of pre-war equipment that had never been exposed to the Wasteland's harsh conditions. While the Brotherhood struggled to maintain aging T-45 and T-51 models, the Enclave continued developing new variants. The X-01 prototypes, that had been in limited production before the war, became the foundation for the X-02 advanced power armor, a design that represented everything the Enclave believed about their superiority over Wasteland survivors. Frank Horrigan became the Enclave's ultimate expression of power armor technology fused with biological enhancement. Already a massive man, Horrigan received extensive modifications using remnants of the FEV program. When encased in custom-built power armor designed specifically for his augmented physiology, he became something beyond human, a killing machine that embodied the Enclave's ruthless efficiency. Horrigan served as the Enclave's enforcer, and stories of his brutality spread terror through any Wasteland communities unfortunate enough to encounter him. The Enclave's Vertibird aircraft gave them mobility the Brotherhood couldn't match. Power armor units could be deployed anywhere within range, dropping into hostile territory with overwhelming force. This combination of air superiority and advanced armor made the Enclave the dominant military power in any region where they chose to operate. Their soldiers wore armor that functioned flawlessly, powered by fusion cores from carefully maintained stockpiles, supported by logistics and infrastructure that the Brotherhood could only envy. Tesla armor represented the Enclave's innovation in specialized power armor variants. Built on the T-51 frame but incorporating energy weapon shielding and advanced defensive systems, these suits excelled in combat against enemies using laser or plasma weapons. The Enclave deployed Tesla armor units in situations where they expected heavy energy weapon resistance, demonstrating their ability to adapt and customize their equipment for specific tactical needs. The Brotherhood's Eastern expedition under Elder Owen Lyons in 2254 brought power armor to the capital Wasteland, where it would play a crucial role in the region's future. Lyons led his chapter across the continent, a journey that took years and cost many lives. When they finally reached the ruins of Washington, D.C., they found a landscape dominated by super mutants and a mysterious organization called the Institute operating from somewhere beneath the city. The power armor they brought became essential for survival in this hostile environment. The capital Wasteland held secrets that even the Brotherhood hadn't anticipated. Pre-war military installations dotted the region, many containing stockpiles of equipment, including a variant the Brotherhood had never encountered in significant numbers. The T-60 series had been developed in the final months before the Great War, an attempt to address some of the T-51's limitations while incorporating lessons learned from a decade of combat. These suits featured improved armor distribution and slightly better energy efficiency, though they lacked the T-51's legendary durability. Liberty Prime, the Brotherhood's discovery in the ruins of the Pentagon, represented pre-war ambition on a scale almost incomprehensible. This massive robot had been designed as the ultimate anti-communist weapon, a propaganda tool and devastating combat platform rolled into one towering package. The Brotherhood spent years attempting to restore the machine to functionality, their power armor-clad engineers working in the depths of the Pentagon's remains. When they finally succeeded, Liberty Prime became a game-changing asset in their war against the Enclave. The conflict between the Brotherhood and Enclave in the capital Wasteland showcased power armor combat at its most intense. Both sides deployed their best troops in their finest equipment, fighting for control of Project Purity and the future of the region. Enclave soldiers in their advanced X-02 armor faced Brotherhood paladins in T-45 and T-51 suits, battles that would have seemed impossible to pre-war observers. These were supposed to be allies, American soldiers fighting for the same nation. Instead, they had become bitter enemies, their power armor serving opposing visions of humanity's future. The Commonwealth region of what had once been Massachusetts became the next chapter in power armor's long history. By 2287, over 2 centuries after the bombs fell, the technology had evolved into something both familiar and strange. The suits themselves hadn't changed much. Most were still pre-war models held together through scavenging and improvisation. What had changed was how Wasteland society interacted with this technology, how it had transformed from military equipment into cultural artifact. The Institute represented a different approach to survival entirely. Operating from a vast underground complex beneath the ruins of MIT, they had preserved pre-war scientific knowledge and continued technological advancement in isolation from the surface world. Their focus lay in synthetic humans, artificial intelligence, and miniaturization rather than the brute force approach of power armor. To Institute scientists, these suits represented outdated thinking, the same militaristic philosophy that had destroyed the old world. They could create synths that looked perfectly human and infiltrate any surface community without detection. Why lumber around in noisy metal suits when subtlety and intelligence could accomplish far more? The Railroad, a secretive organization dedicated to freeing synths from Institute control, occasionally acquired power armor through raids or salvage operations. Their limited technical expertise meant maintaining these suits posed constant challenges. A railroad agent in power armor was a rare sight, usually reserved for desperate situations when stealth had failed, and raw firepower became necessary. They lacked the Brotherhood's obsessive dedication to preservation or the resources to keep armor in prime condition. Most railroad power armor showed obvious signs of wear, patched together from mismatched parts, and held operational through determination rather than proper maintenance. The T-60 series proliferated throughout the Commonwealth, though its origins remain somewhat mysterious. Some claim these suits represented the final evolution of power armor design before the Great War, manufactured in the last desperate months as America prepared for its invasion of China. Others suggested they were an early post-war development, created by military remnants who still possessed manufacturing capability. Regardless of their true origin, T-60 suits became the standard equipment for the Brotherhood of Steel's Eastern chapter under Elder Arthur Maxson's leadership. Maxson himself represented a new generation of Brotherhood philosophy. Unlike Elder Lyons, who had prioritized helping capital Wasteland settlers, Maxson returned to the original mission of technological control. Under his command, the Brotherhood transformed into an aggressive military force, no longer content to simply preserve technology, but actively seizing it from anyone they deemed unworthy. Power armor became the symbol of this aggressive stance, Brotherhood soldiers using their superior equipment to enforce Maxson's will across the Commonwealth. The Prydwen, a massive airship that served as the Brotherhood's mobile headquarters, arrived in the Commonwealth with fanfare and intimidation in equal measure. Its cargo holds contained dozens of power armor suits, enough to equip a small army of knights and paladins. The ship's arrival fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region. Suddenly, the Institute's synth infiltrators and the Railroad's guerrilla tactics faced an enemy that could deploy overwhelming force anywhere within the Commonwealth. Vertibird gunships, themselves relics of Enclave technology captured and repurposed, dropped power armor troops into combat zones with devastating efficiency. But not all power armor in the Commonwealth served the Brotherhood's rigid hierarchy. Raiders, those violent opportunists who preyed on weak settlements, had discovered their own suits over the decades. Raider power armor embodied Wasteland ingenuity at its most desperate and creative. These suits were nightmares of improvisation, frames held together with scrap metal, car parts, and whatever materials the raiders could weld into place. Functionality mattered more than aesthetics. If a piece of armor plating came from a pre-war car, a building facade, or a dead rival's suit, raiders didn't care as long as it stopped bullets. The psychology of raider power armor use differed dramatically from military applications. Brotherhood soldiers wore their armor with pride and discipline, maintaining it carefully and following proper operational procedures. Raiders treated their suits like mechanical extensions of their own violent personalities. They painted them in garish colors, added spikes and intimidating decorations, and pushed the equipment far beyond safe operational limits. A raider in power armor wasn't trying to be a soldier, they were trying to be a monster, using the suit's imposing presence to terrify victims before the killing even started. The Atom Cats, a small gang operating out of a garage south of Boston, represented the opposite end of the spectrum from raider brutality. These wastelanders had developed genuine affection for power armor, treating the suits as works of art rather than just tools of violence. They specialized in restoration and customization, taking rusted frames found in warehouses or military installations and lovingly bringing them back to functionality. Their custom paint jobs became sought after across the Commonwealth, bright flames and checkerboard patterns that transformed military hardware into personal expression. Walking into the Atom Cat's garage felt like stepping into a pre-war hot rod shop, if such places had worked on mechanized combat suits instead of cars. The gang's technical knowledge rivaled the Brotherhood's in some respects, though they lacked access to the same resources and archives. What they understood through practical experience and experimentation sometimes surpassed what Brotherhood scribes knew from dusty manuals. They could listen to a servo motor and diagnose problems by sound alone, spot stress fractures in armor plating that would escape less experienced eyes, and jury-rig solutions to mechanical problems using whatever materials came to hand. Nuka World, the pre-war amusement park turned raider stronghold, contained some of the rarest power armor variants in the Commonwealth. The park's galactic zone had featured X-01 suits as part of its space-themed attractions, pristine examples of pre-war advanced technology that had survived in better condition than most military stockpiles. Raiders who controlled Nuka World jealously guarded these suits, recognizing their value even if they didn't fully understand the technology. A raider boss in X-01 armor commanded respect and fear from subordinates who knew that suit made them nearly invincible in Wasteland combat. The proliferation of power armor across the Commonwealth by 2287 would have seemed impossible to pre-war observers. These suits had been designed for elite soldiers, requiring extensive training and military discipline to operate effectively. Now, anyone with enough determination and luck could potentially acquire and use one. A farmer could stumble across a suit in a forgotten warehouse and become a local hero defending their settlement. A scavenger might piece together a working frame from multiple wrecks and sell it for enough caps to live comfortably for years. The technology had democratized through necessity and time, spreading beyond the military structures that had originally controlled it. Yet this democratization came with costs. Most Wasteland power armor operators lacked proper training, leading to accidents and misuse. Suits were pushed beyond their operational limits, maintained poorly if at all, and often abandoned when fusion cores depleted. The landscape became dotted with dead frames, empty suits that stood as monuments to humanity's past glory and present struggles. Each empty frame told a story, whether of a Brotherhood paladin who died in combat, a raider who ran out of power at an inopportune moment, or a scavenger who discovered that owning power armor and maintaining it were very different challenges. 210 years after the Great War, power armor endures as perhaps the most visible symbol of what humanity once achieved and what it lost. The suits that roll off assembly lines by the thousands in the 2070s now exist as precious relics, each one a tangible connection to a world that most Wastelanders know only through stories and ruins. Children grow up hearing tales of armored giants, unable to fully comprehend that these mythical warriors once represented standard military equipment, as common to pre-war soldiers as rifles or helmets. The transformation of power armor from tool to legend reflects the broader story of post-apocalyptic survival. Pre-war America mass-produced these suits in factories that employed thousands of workers, assembly lines churning out frames and components with industrial efficiency. The knowledge required to build a suit from scratch existed in technical manuals, computer databases, and the minds of countless engineers. That infrastructure vanished in nuclear fire. The factories became radioactive craters or corroded ruins. The databases corrupted or were destroyed. The engineers died, and most of their knowledge died with them. What remains is a sort of technological dark age, where the ability to maintain barely exceeds the rate of decay. Brotherhood scribes preserve what they can, carefully copying deteriorating manuals by hand, teaching apprentices the rituals of maintenance and repair. But each generation loses something: techniques forgotten, materials that cannot be replicated, subtle understanding that comes from working with fresh equipment, rather than centuries-old artifacts. The Brotherhood fights a losing battle against entropy, knowing that eventually the last power armor suit will fail beyond their ability to restore it. Yet the armor persists with remarkable resilience. Pre-war engineering anticipated combat damage, environmental extremes, and extended deployment in hostile territories. What those engineers never imagined was their creations operating for centuries beyond intended lifespans. A T-51B designed for perhaps a decade of military service now functions after 200 years, a testament to the quality of its construction. The fusion cores that power these suits demonstrate similar longevity. Though irreplaceable, a single core can maintain a suit through years of operation if used carefully, its miniature reactor slowly depleting but remaining functional long past what should have been possible. Different factions treat power armor according to their philosophical outlooks and practical needs. The Brotherhood sees sacred trust, technology too dangerous for common hands, a responsibility that comes with the privilege of membership. The Enclave viewed genetic purity and governmental authority, armor reserved for true humans serving the legitimate continuation of American governance. Raiders see opportunity and intimidation, mechanical advantage over weaker prey. Settlers see protection or threat, depending on who wears the suit, whether the armored figure approaching their walls comes as defender or conqueror. Individual Wastelanders who acquire power armor face profound questions about identity and responsibility. Putting on a suit changes how others perceive you, and how you perceive yourself. You become taller, stronger, nearly invulnerable to the dangers that kill unprotected humans daily. That transformation carries psychological weight. Some handle it well, using their newfound capability to protect communities and fight genuine threats. Others succumb to the temptation of easy power, becoming tyrants in their small territories, taking what they want because no one can stop them. The sound of power armor has become part of the Wasteland's audio landscape, distinctive and unmistakable. The whir of servo motors, the heavy footfalls that shake the ground, the hiss of hydraulics adjusting to the operator's movements. These sounds trigger instinctive reactions in anyone who hears them. Some feel hope, believing help has arrived. Others feel dread, knowing violence approaches. The sound carries meaning beyond its mechanical source, announcing the presence of something from the old world, a ghost of America's military might walking among the ruins it failed to prevent. Maintenance rituals have taken on almost spiritual significance for those who work with power armor regularly. The careful cleaning of joints where dirt could cause seizure, the inspection of armor plating for stress fractures that might propagate into catastrophic failure, the monitoring of fusion core output to predict when replacement will become necessary. These tasks require patience, knowledge, and resources that grow scarcer with each passing year. A skilled power armor technician commands respect in any Wasteland community, their expertise representing the thin line between functional armor and useless metal. The empty frames scattered across the Wasteland serve as monuments to hubris and hope in equal measure. Each abandoned suit marks a moment when power armor failed its operator, or when the operator failed to maintain their equipment. They stand in silent testimony to the challenges of preserving pre-war technology, in a world that lacks the industrial base to support it. Yet they also represent possibility. Every empty frame might be restored. Every dead suit potentially brought back to life by someone with sufficient skill and determination. Stories about power armor have evolved into modern mythology. Wastelanders tell their children about the Brotherhood paladins who defended settlements from super mutant attacks. They whisper fearfully about Enclave soldiers who slaughtered entire communities in the name of genetic purity. They laugh about raiders whose scavenged suits failed at crucial moments, leaving them trapped in metal coffins. These stories blend fact and fiction, history and legend, creating narratives that give meaning to the scattered evidence of the old world. The future of power armor remains uncertain. The Brotherhood continues hoarding and preserving, but their resources strain under the weight of maintaining an aging fleet. The Institute could theoretically manufacture new suits if they devoted resources to the project, but their philosophical opposition to such crude technology makes that unlikely. Smaller factions and independent operators keep individual suits running through ingenuity and desperation, but they cannot reverse the long-term trend toward decay. Perhaps power armor will endure for another century, maintained by dedicated technicians who refuse to let the technology die. Perhaps it will fade gradually, suits failing one by one, until only a handful remain as museum pieces, carefully preserved but no longer operational. Or perhaps some unexpected discovery will emerge from the Wasteland's depths, a pre-war facility with manufacturing equipment intact, technical knowledge preserved, and the means to produce new suits. The Wasteland holds many secrets, and not all of them have been uncovered. What remains certain is that power armor's impact on post-war society extends far beyond its military applications. It represents continuity with the past, proof that humanity once commanded technologies that seem almost magical to current generations. It demonstrates that knowledge and capability can survive apocalypse if enough people commit to preservation. Most importantly, it stands as a reminder that tools are neither good nor evil. The same armor that crushed protests and enforced tyranny also protected refugees and defended the innocent. What matters is not the technology itself, but the choices made by those who wield it. From the frozen battlefields of Anchorage to the irradiated streets of the Commonwealth, power armor has been witness to humanity's darkest hours and finest moments. It saw the resource wars that consumed the globe. It participated in the nuclear exchange that ended civilization. It survived the aftermath and adapted to new purposes in a transformed world. The armor endures, battered and worn but still functional, still relevant, still shaping the Wasteland's future as it shaped the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey through power armor's incredible history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Fallout lore, please consider subscribing for more stories from the Wasteland. Until next time, stay safe out there in the ruins, and remember that even in the darkest timeline, human ingenuity finds ways to survive.